Today marks a pivotal moment of this build. Today is the day that the engine comes out of this, and hopefully fits into this. Didn't I tell you this would happen? I bet you thought you'd never see that intro again. Well, you were wrong. Anyway, as I said, this engine comes out today. And I've been watching a lot of videos on how to do it. And I've concluded that there are two ways to do it. Firstly, the most obvious one, is to lift the body off the engine. The second way is to take the front off and slide the engine out forwards. Now, I've been doing a lot of research about this, and I've decided that I'm going to do both. Because firstly, I'm going to need all the radiators and gubbins that are hidden in this bumper. And secondly, because I can, because I have a fully sick and hectic workshop. But first, I'm going to be rearranging all the crap in this workshop so I can actually use my hoist. Because there's a slightly immobile object taking it up at the moment. So let's deal with that. Here's what I love about crappy eBay tools. They give you a picture on the front. The picture shows one washer, one nut. The instructions say, put 2 washers underneath the nut. And then they say one of these washers is a locking washer. Which of these is the locking washer? So the only sensible thing I can think of doing is putting this washer on first, putting it through the hole, and then putting the small washer and the nut on top. Thanks, cheap eBay. This is definitely not going to be the most stable thing in the world. But it's only a car body, it's not particularly heavy, so I'm sure it'll be fine. But I'm going to add some security measures. Now, this part of the exercise is called car curling, because I learnt my lesson from engine stands, and little things getting in the way of wheels on heavy loads are not ingredients for a good time. So, let curling commence. Now, that was extremely sketchy. And it's one of those things that if you don't touch it, it's not going to fall over. But I feel like it's going to fall over at some point. I've only got to move it several more times, so it should be okay for now. Now, if I had a name for it, I'd say this is called the Russian doll effect, where you have one car, and it takes up the space of many other cars. So I have this taking up a car space, this taking up a car space, and soon you will too. Now anyway, this is where things start to get a little bit surgical, because I know I'm never going to use that engine again. And that's why I didn't really take too much care in taking it out. The workshop's a bit filthy, there's tools everywhere. So I'm going to clean everything up and make sure everything's available, so I'm not struggling for tools and fishing through dirty piles of mud on the floor looking for them. So you can sit back and watch the next 30 seconds of sped up cleaning, because that's what you're all here for. That'll do for now, because even I'm bored of this. Now this is a time where we give a moment of silence in remembrance of this Volkswagen Touareg V10. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it. If I took it for a blue slip right now, it would pass without a doubt. I foolishly thought I would be using this as a daily driver, but obviously finding a small patrol threw a spanner in the works for that, which means that I've been able to crack on quicker than I thought with this project. So here are some of the memories we've had together.
I like to be educated, but I'm so frustrated. Hello to my loneliness. I guess that ignorance is bliss. Take me back to before I knew.
So to the extremely sensitive folk on the Touareg Owners Forum, my condolences. But in all seriousness, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this car, and I do actually regret tearing it apart. But considering what I paid for it, I can't get too sentimental about it, although it is an extremely cool car to drive. Goodbye, Touareg. Anyway, let's get this engine out. Now this is another one of those choose your own adventure moments. You've got two options here, because you have to drop the whole subframe out with the engine, because it's bolted to the bottom of it, funnily enough. So I can either take out the whole suspension strut, and then disconnect the brake calipers. But the other option is to disconnect this ball joint here, take off the brake caliper, and leave that with the shock in place. And what this means is if under the very likely circumstance that this engine doesn't fit in that chassis, I can put it all back together. That's why I'm being a bit meticulous with how I take this apart. Because this hasn't been done before, and if it can't be done, I don't want to be left with a lot of scrap metal. Moving on. Don't be silly, we're not mechanics. Well, after removing that, I'd hoped that I'd get a nice view of the side of the engine, but instead, all I can see is the back of the airbox, as well as loads of mystery hoses, and a strange electronic valve thing, and a strange electronic thing. This is going to be quite a big project. Now, seeing as all of you have definitely watched the first episode of this build, you'd know that I changed the engine oil, but I didn't change the transmission oil. It was tactical, because I know I've got to take off all the cooler, and it makes no sense to change all the oil when it's going to be drained out of the cooler anyway. Now, I probably should have noticed before, but this is an extremely good thing. The tail shaft has only got 3 bolts on that flange, and it bolts in through this rubber cush drive thing onto another 3 bolts. Now, moving on to the patrol, as you probably already know, is 4 bolts. This means adapting this shaft to fit that gearbox could be as easy as a disc like that. Obviously, this is something different, this is another product. But seeing as there's not 4 holes of a different PCD, there's a chance the holes might be spaced in such a way that I can just make a simple adapter plate and be done with it. But that's a job for future me.
You give me midnight, you whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high
Lollipop and SpongeBob!
So those of you playing at home and using this as a guide on how to remove your V10 engine, firstly, don't. Secondly, everything was held up by the cable that does the bonnet latch. Followed it through. Quick disconnect. And this took me an embarrassingly long amount of time to find. So this is where I am with it so far. I think I've got everything disconnected. All the wiring from in there. There was one ECU here and another one over there, one for each bank, I presume. A load of funky electrical connectors. I have made sure I've labelled absolutely everything. Word for the wise, these engines have a lot of coolant. Ask me how I know. And it seems to come out from everywhere. So I've loosened all the mounts, and hopefully it's a case of put something underneath the engine for it to sit on and then lift the car off the body. But we'll see. This is either the moment of truth or a very expensive mistake. Now at the moment, the engine looks like a bit of a sad elephant. This is because I did something a bit silly. I thought I was supporting the front of the engine a bit too close to the centre of gravity, so the gearbox was lifting up. So I moved the jack to the front of the engine, and as it happened, the back of the gearbox was just hung up on a piece of the exhaust. That's why it's tilting backwards like this. So now I'm left in a very precarious situation where I have to pick up this engine without damaging it, while it's precariously balanced on axle stands. So let's see how that goes. Now that was horrendously terrifying and precarious, and I'm never going to do that again. But at least the engine's out. So now we can see why I think this is a good engine. Now firstly, my plan for this, as you can see, the engine sits on a subframe with the front differential and everything like that. So I'm going to unbolt this from the bottom of the engine and put it back in the body, so then at least I can wheel the car around so it's not taking up my hoist like everything else seems to. And I'm going to put it there. Now you might notice something missing from the front of this engine. That's right, there's no alternator, there's no auxiliaries, there's no belts driving anything, just a flywheel in the middle. What you have is the air conditioning pump, which I think is driven by the power steering pump, which is then driven by something back here. And that's about it for the cool and gimmicky things. Aside from you've got a turbo there, and a turbo there. And if I roughly run a tape measure over the length of the whole thing, we're looking about 1830 mil. if I did the same thing on the TB42, you're actually looking about 1930. So the whole thing's about 100mm longer on the old engine. Now my grubby-faced concern on this is not the length of the engine, because I didn't have any doubts about that in the first place. However, like some people, the struggle in this case is with girth. Now I've got about 640mm to play with between the chassis rails, and I've got about 400mm that I can go up from the original engine mounts. And as you can see, everything's very compact in here. Now the most sticky out part of this is the engine mount. And there was a fantastic gentleman on YouTube who is taking one of these out who took the measurements for me. Now I don't know if he was American or Canadian, I can't tell the difference, but he said that the distance between the engine mounts is 25.5 inches, which is about 640mm, which means that it's an almost perfect fit for the chassis. Now in the worst case, I can probably tuck the engine a little bit closer to the frame rails, but to do that, I'd have to remanufacture some engine mounts, which I'm almost definitely going to have to do anyway. But aside from that, this is either going to be the most closely not fitting engine in the world, or tightest engine that's ever been in a patrol body. Now what's next, I hear you cry? Well, I'm going to be putting that into that. But unfortunately, as you can see, there's a trailer in the way, which means we're going to have to wait until the next episode to find out if it fits. What a cliffhanger.